Hello everyone, it's xBundok here, and it's time to get some color onto this ship. Now I'm going to open with a picture of why I don't film me priming. This is where I prime. It's the deck at the apartment, it's tight quarters, and it's just putting a singular coat of paint on a product. So those are all the side pieces there, all the hatches and the cannons and things. I didn't get those primed. I did pretty much run out of black primer. I did use a rattle can, which, it's not my favorite, but for something of this size, it's perfectly fine. So our next step, we're going to get some of our white, and we're going to dry brush this entire ship. Like I said before, I wanted to dry brush and then thin out the paint I was going to use in the airbrush for the base coat, simply because I thought that would add a lot more shading just from the start, and hopefully be a lot less work later if I do the work now. Now, I'm not going to film every single step of this, the entire process. I'm going to give you guys like little snippets like I'm doing here, because once you see a part, you just kind of understand the concept for the whole thing. So I will give a time count at the end of how long it took to do each step, just so you guys can kind of gauge it in case you're taking on something similar. So we're going to get this dry brushing done, and then we'll get on to the next step, which is going to be the airbrushing. Alright, so this is how she's looking after all the airbrushing is done. Actually kind of really like how it looks like this. Honestly, either be it for, a ghost ship style or a black pearl kind of thing. Which I guess just means I have to buy a second pirate ship, but, don't tell the other half that, because, that's another chunk of money. But yeah, I really like how it looks with just the black and white. But we are going to keep going on. We are going to add the brown layers to it, get it looking like a nice, just regular old ship. Now, my plan was, I had wanted to do the decks in a lighter brown versus the rest of the ship. But this boat is as much my husband's as it is mine, and he kind of likes having the idea of it all matching. So the deck color being the same as the side color. So that's what we're going to do. If we change our minds later on, we can always go ahead and dry brush and do some thin coats on the decks to make them that lighter brown. But we're just going to roll with one. Now, this bit takes a while. I think this was by far the longest step I've had so far. And that's just of actual work time. Some of the parts also take close to the same amount of time, but I do need to take breaks, such as if I'm doing detail work or things like that. So my advice for anyone doing something larger, even if it's all the same color, clean out your airbrush. Make sure you're checking on your airbrush. Your airbrush is working hard, okay? Try to remember not to let it just run continuously, just feed and paint through it, even if you are just doing, regular coats. Just take care of your airbrush. Your airbrush is your friend. If your airbrush goes bad, you're going to have a bad time. So what we're going to do is it's actually the leather brown color that we're going to be using for this. And we're just going to coat this entire thing. So let's get started on it. All right, so now that our airbrushing is done, you can kind of see here, we do have the black and the white, the dry brushing showing through, which is great. That is what I wanted, so we got some texture. Now, this is the larger mini, oxymoron, I know. So we can pull out our larger brushes for this. You don't have to use your tiny brushes. Don't feel bad. It's okay. It's okay to use a bigger brush. It'll be fine. What we're going to do is we're going to take some of our contrast paints, and we're going to go over this ship. The contrast, they're thin enough so that you can use them almost as a wash, but they have that pigment. We're going to end up adding a little bit of warmth to this figure. I ended up not using the oak brown. I may use that in advance or later on in order to add some depth to it. I mostly used the fur shade. So you can see on the anchor, I did just that versus airbrushing. And that's fine because, it's ruddy wood. I want that to be even deeper than the rest of the ship because that's been underwater, that's been submerged, that's been aging. So I did not use just the paint on the ship. I will say that I would add a little bit of the paint to the mini, and then I would wet the brush and then spread it out just a little bit more. So I would thin it, but I did not thin it on a palette or anything like that. I did thin it on the miniature. That works for some folks. It doesn't work for other folks. It's entirely up to you. It just did what I needed it to do for this figure, and so I just went with it. So we're going to get a little bit of that color on here. All right, so this is how Sophie's Revenge is looking after that contrast layer. You can see it really added a lot of warmth to the figure. It lightened up the wood a bit. It made it a bit less ruddy. Now we're going to darken it back down again. I know it probably seems redundant to some folks, you know, back and forth, but just trust the process. You just got to trust it. So I'm going to do something that I had a lot of trouble with before on a miniature that I love. I'm going to use some noosh. Now, you'll realize I'm not good at following instructions. Don't know if that's come up before, but I'm not. So it is supposed to be 6 drops of noosh to 1 drop of paint. I started out following that rule, and then the paint was clogged that I want to use, so I ended up dumping some in there. So I just kind of tried to match the tones and viscosity that it looks like it's supposed to have. I mean, I think it works out fine. I started with good intentions, I promise. I just didn't follow through. So we are using the noosh with that oak brown like I showed earlier and a bit of black, just so we can get, you know, like a ship that's been out at sea for God knows how long. It's not going to be nice and pristine. It's going to be a bit beat up. And we're not going to paint the sidewalls or anything like that. It's not going to have a blue coat. It's not going to have, you know, a red coat. It's just going to be a brown wooden chip, just straightforward. The only thing that will be colored is there are some of the, you saw the floral, was it filigree? I always mess that up. Details on the side as well. Narrating's hard, guys. Along with Sophie on the front. So she will get some color too. Otherwise, everything's just going to be brown. Now, I didn't use a super heavy hand with this noosh. Let's see if I remember to lower the boat into the camera. Just because I didn't need it to be, there we go, super deep. Just until you get that thin, glossy layer. And you got to remember, if you're using this, it does take time to dry. It is mimicking an oil wash, which would also take time to dry. It's just an acrylic medium. So don't rush it. Don't rush your next step. Let this take its course. Always check on it. Check on a piece of the mini that, you know, might not necessarily be always looked at by the players. Because, I mean, this stayed tacky afterwards, I'd say for probably a solid 5 to 6 hours. So you don't want to hop in and try and do something else, and it's just going to get bad. You know, you're going to clump up with it. Just let it dry. All in all, I think it ended up looking pretty okay this time around, versus the last attempt at its use. All right, now we're going to get our secondary color on. It's going to be all the mast, rigging, and sails. So we're going to use a little bit of our linen white and tusk ivory, and mix that up. I ended up not using the solid white or any of the Screaming Skull. It was just those 2 colors. And getting this painted up. Now, I did make the rigging a little bit darker. I believe I used my Griffin tan. I added a couple of drops in there just to set it off from the same mast color. I'm sorry, the sail color. And then I ended up doing a soft wash, the Army Painter soft wash on the sails, just to, well, and the rigging too, just to add a little bit of depth and a little bit of wear to them. So that is going to be the last step of painting for this video. The next one, we're going to be doing a whole lot of the more detail work versus just flat coats of color. So I will say this part, you can see I did do some overpainting on the sails, which, you know, it happens. It's okay. After 2 solid days of the weekend painting, your hands end up a little bit tired. So we'll just go back over with some browns and we'll make that blend in. That'll be just fine. Don't worry about it. Again, it's if you guys are doing something like this, you can always go back. You can always fix it up. If you're doing any sort of painting, you can always go back. You can always fix it up. It's not the end of the world if something goes horribly wrong. Hopefully you folks have learned that with the patience of trying to paint eyes on anything. You can always go back and retouch. So this is just a little example of why I am not in my videos, why I don't feel the need to be in them. It's boring. You're just seeing somebody stare at a piece of plastic and put color on a piece of plastic, and you can't really see what's going on. I'm fine with being a faceless YouTube video. It really doesn't bother me that much. You folks know who's behind the camera. You know the intentions of who's behind the camera. So I have no reason really. And it's just dull. But just so you understand, like I said, it's also why I didn't include all of the painting content, because this is what it breaks down to being. It's hours of just this, because everything's small, everything's tedious and repetitive. This is a miniature, where it's a lot of the same thing over and over. It's symmetrical. It's a lot of the same colors. As you can see for the railing, you know, those are all seahorses that are all going to need a little bit of touches the whole way around the ship. So this is why I just show you what I'm painting, show you a little snippet of it, and then move on to the next step, because this would be dull and none of you would make it through the whole video. Most of you don't make it through the whole video now. I see the time frames. I see what's going on. I look at the reports. It's okay. It's okay to admit it. It's fine. Or if you watch them in chunks and come back, I totally understand. But yeah, there's no reason for this to be our content. And this is our final pass over the ship at the end of this stage. Like I said, the next step is going to be a lot more detailing. So touching up any overpainted parts. You see doing that detailing that's on the side of the cabin there, all the faces and the seahorses. Maybe adding some delineating lines on the decks so that when you're playing, you see where it's supposed to end, even if you remove one off. But I think she's looking good so far. So like and comment if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're ready to come back for the next one, because there's a lot more boat. Take care, guys.